Well, hello and welcome. My name is Robbie McHugh with the EMS Leadership Academy, and I am here today with an expert roundup of our roundtable. Recently, we just did the EMS Safety Roundtable, and today we're joined by a few guests. First, Julianne Stevenson. Julianne, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about our EMS Educators Roundtable. So we've brought some educators along with us as well. I'd like to welcome Nick Long. Nick, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
And for, again, more perspective here, agency leaders, Weston Davis. Weston, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we're here to talk about what's on a lot of people's mind. It's been all over social media. And honestly, I think it was 6 to 7 weeks ago, Julianne and I were chatting back and forth. And I said, Julianne, boy, this seems like it's going to be a really controversial topic. National Registry Board's public comments about accreditation, and you are the accreditation expert in my world. So maybe you can go ahead and introduce yourselves, tell our audience a little bit about who you are in the world of paramedic education and accreditation.
All right. Yeah, I figured Robbie suggested we do this, and why not kick the ant pile? I mean, we're good at it. We're paramedics. I'm Julianne Stevenson. I have been in EMS since 1997. It was purely accidental. I started in education the next year, just as my second job, and found another love and passion. I progressed on through, ended up a full-time instructor, a program director, and I was very frustrated that the process of proving that we had done our jobs, i.e. the collecting the documentation for accreditation, was so clunky and onerous. And so Sterling Credentials was born to try to take that off of the educators and the students so that they could focus on education. And so, it's a fundamental conflict of interest. I just want to say right now, I would not have invested my life, particularly into this company, had I had any thought that it was even conceivable that we would backslide.
All right. Certainly, we're disclosing all interests here. Again, our interest, my interest is just to disclose that is with the EMS Leadership Academy. And, we've built a platform for educators, for experts that are out there to really share their opinions and help educate us all. That's what this is all about. So, Weston, if you could just share a little bit about yourself and why you're here today to talk about this.
Yeah, as the label says, I'm Weston Davis. I'm currently in Texarkana, USA. I'm the area director for the Texas operations for LifeNet. We have operations in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And in the Texas division, we have about 140 field providers. And prior to this, I was the EMS director for the city of El Campo in Texas. And so my entire career has been fire and EMS in Texas, getting my start back in 1999. When I got out of high school, I went and got my EMT and then went on and did the EMT intermediate, as it was called then. At the same time, I was doing the fire academy and then went on to become a paramedic. And so I've been a paramedic ever since 2001 and working in various levels. And I've worked in the private sector for fire departments. I owned a company for a little while. And then, I'm with a private not-for-profit now.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. It's great to have, again, leaders that have been in this world since sounds like very early on, and you've seen a lot of change, and we're very thankful to have you here for your perspective. So, Nicholas, if you want to tell folks who you are and where you're joining from.
My name is Nick Long. I'm the EMS program coordinator at Vernon College. We're located in Wichita Falls, Texas. We are a rural community. City of Wichita Falls is about 100,000 people. I started my EMS career in 2006, transitioning from being a deputy sheriff into being a EMT and then on into being a paramedic. And I worked for American Medical Response in a very busy 911 service here. We worked 12-hour shifts, and in those 12-hour shifts, we ran 15 calls a shift per truck, and then transitioned into the fire EMS side, and then came over to the education side. When I graduated from paramedic in 2012, I started adjunct instructing for the college here and skills instructing, and then that transitioned to me applying for the job that I have now, going back to school and getting an undergraduate degree and obtaining accreditation are starting the accreditation process to get our paramedic program back that's been gone for 6 years from our area.
Well, congratulations on that work. It sounds like a really long journey, and that will pay off for the folks in your area. For those that don't know, my name is Robbie McHugh, co-founder of the EMS Leadership Academy, and my undergrad experience was in information technology. And when I was going through, my undergrad work, I took a year leave of absence to do the paramedic program. I was already an EMT, so I've always combined my passion of technology and my love of being a paramedic now for almost 20 years. I'm from upstate New York, so I've got a bunch of people from Texas in the house, and folks good to represent New York. And if everything sounds okay with this live stream, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. So just comment where you're joining in from. If the sound hopefully sounds okay, we're going to take all your questions and aggregate them so we can see them and hopefully answer your questions about this very controversial would Julian say, kick the ant pile a little bit about accreditation. And maybe, Julian, you could start us off with some terminology: COA, KHEP, accreditation. This is your world. You live and breathe it. We don't necessarily hear these words every day. And I feel like a lot of people on the stream probably have similar questions.
Yeah, so thank you, Robbie. Just to kind of make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language, I'm not going to go way out in the weeds, but there are about 3 critical things to think about. The first is accreditation. Accreditation technically comes from an organization called KHEP, Committee for Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs. Each allied health education program that KHEP accredits has its own committee that sort of customizes the overarching guidelines for their particular discipline. And so the committee is, when we say COA, KHEP has a number, well, about 32 it looks like, a number of committees, a number of COAs. The particular one we're talking about is the COA EMSP, Committee on Accreditation of EMS Education Programs. And so I just refer to it as a COA. Nick's just been through this process and has newly minted a letter of review. The only other one I wanted to bring up is National Registry. It's a completely separate entity, started as a non-for-profit, and in fact, it wasn't NR at the beginning. But the two have worked together because of some documents that got us to where we are today. You know, when I entered in the 90s, pretty much anybody that wanted to could put on a paramedic class. And in 2007, the National Registry's own research established that students who came from accredited programs had better pass rates. And so it was then that they declared that by 2013, candidates would have to come from COA or KHEP accredited education programs. And so that kind of, I think, brings us up to speed where we are today. Nick, unless you have something to add that I've glossed over.
No, just for clarification, like you said, so 2007, you talked about, we have a document that has been since updated to EMS Agenda for the Future 2050, but then it was EMS Agenda for the Future 2020, which laid out not only just where we were going as an EMS profession, but the education. And I talked about that accreditation side. And so when COA or when KHEP and National Registry started this conversation and COA came involved, came to be, the determination to not solely just accept accreditation. Accreditation means that you have graduated a cohort, they've come back in, they have looked over your success and pass rate, your student placement, your retention of your students that have come in, and all the documentation that goes along with, what skills do they perform, how many skills do they perform successfully, unsuccessfully, their testing scores and things like that. They said, look, if we do that, we're going to lose everything because we don't have that many accredited programs out there. So they also left this avenue of programs having a letter of review. So what I had to do to obtain a letter of review, which allows me to start a paramedic cohort, which will start one in about 14 days now on the 22nd of August, and graduate that paramedic cohort, the letter of review to the National Registry allows for that student to test without having the full accreditation, because I have gone through and I have proved that we not only have the facilities and the financial resources to do the teaching, that I have gone through and created a lesson plan, and I have outcomes, that we have an advisory committee in place that reviews everything, that I have a medical director in place that reviews all the education standards that we're putting out and the things that we're doing in the program. And this letter of review allows me to start this class, graduate them, then I'll go through another site visit with the COA to obtain my full accreditation. And they'll come back in and they're going to look at my first cohort's pass rate. They're going to look at my placement. They're going to look at my retention of my students to make sure that we have met the standards that are put out.
Yeah, and you know what? I think I want to add one more thing, which is let's just talk about accreditation in society. I mean, what all types of organizations can we think of that use accreditation as a, what would you call it, a measuring bar or a standard?
Setting a higher bar.
Yeah, you know, I mean, education is, look at SACS, like you were talking about. So to maybe go one step off in the weeds, we're today talking about accreditation specifically of paramedic programs. However, educational institutions are already accredited.
Well, that's
right?
For the institutional accreditation and programmatic accreditation.
Right. But then medical facilities. I was asking Weston the other day if there's any advantages to having your medical facility accredited in some way, or your provider.
So this is interesting because every industry, like you're pointing to, has its own has a set of standards, right? We've got CAS accreditation, which theoretic CAMS accreditation, URAMI accreditation. I'm a licensed consultant for the Standards of Excellence Institute out of Maryland, a national brand. If you're a nonprofit, they've created a framework of ethics and accountability that if your nonprofit meets these 23 different areas, they've done studies to show that statistically you will have higher revenues as a nonprofit than those that don't do accreditation. So there's data involved as opposed to these are just somebody's good ideas. I spent 14 years as a leader of a small organization, and I wish I had found an organization like the Standards because they've packaged all this up nicely, and then it's just a path and a plan to follow, as opposed to Robbie trying to reinvent the wheel and figure out how to solve all these big issues that we've had brilliant people in the past already think about, and that could kind of guide us along the way. And that's my view on why I think accreditation or having a set of standards can benefit any organization. And maybe Weston, you can talk a little bit about your experience as a leader in your area. I mean, have you had any experience with accreditation? Or I know we're talking here between, you know, the academic side of accreditation versus maybe the on the street experiences of accreditation.
You know, I mean, honestly, I think that, you know, at the base, accreditation is something that's a good thing. But, you know, for the employer, I remember way back when, you know, before accreditation, before National Registry came to Texas, was, you know, the difference between hiring someone that came from you know, there was people that came from a college that you didn't necessarily want to hire them if they came from that program, and then people from another program. And then, you know, that I would say that's there still today is, you know, there's people that come from particular programs that you know, you're going to have more trouble training them than you would somewhere else. And so I don't think you got rid of that, you know, so we still have that to deal with. So I don't know that it solved much for the employers perspective.
Well, I mean, that brings up a really interesting point about just sort of the brokenness of all human systems, doesn't it? That, you know, you have the people who will ethically attend to that group of like you said, Robbie, standards or guides or whatever, but then you have the people that are going to figure out how to make it look like they do. But is that enough reason to say, well, off with your head, accreditation, we don't need it?
Yeah, that's true. And I think, you know, it really depends on the individual. You know, I think accreditation shows that the organization is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're following all the applicable rules and regulations and that sort of thing. But I mean, ultimately, your measure should be what happens to your people when they get out. Did they go off and get jobs somewhere? Did they go off and, I know pass rates are tracked, but what happened after that? So I think really
that's actually technically part of the accreditation process. Is within 12 months of I think between 6 and 12 months of my students graduating, I have to send out surveys both to the employer and the employee. To the employer, my question there is, when you brought this person in, how much training did you have to do? And if a program is looking at these surveys as what they're supposed to look at these surveys and apply these surveys, we take those responses, and I can come back into my paramedic program and alter my education. Hey, yeah, they were good here, here, and here, but they were really weak when it came to this particular skill or the knowledge of this particular medication, and I should be altering my education again, because these are the stakeholders of my program, the people that are hiring my students, and I still work with these people. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I work part-time on the truck still, and so I want to make sure that these students going out are still good. And so part of that accreditation process is that survey that we send out to employers and employees. And to the employees, I'm asking them, hey, when you left class, were you prepared for the workforce, or were you ill prepared?
Yeah, and based on our preliminary discussion, Weston, I actually went into the literature, and there's a 2020 paper, a group of how they describe themselves, individuals concerned with medical education, had gotten together to talk about it. It was called From Processes to Outcomes and Back, or something like this. But basically, this word processes is a big focus in accreditation, because it's just because you're setting out the processes doesn't mean that you're reaching the desired result. And so there's been this inclination to try to look at outcomes. But as cited in this paper, the discovery is, despite the fact that we have all this great technology, the identification of meaningful outcomes that we could look at after the fact. In terms of patient outcomes, even nobody's figured that one out yet. And so we're kind of back to accrediting the processes of education. But like Nick said, those outcome surveys. Now, my participation in those surveys, or the participation that I got when I was sending them out, was next to nothing. And so here we come back to, everybody wants to call themselves a stakeholder when they have a problem with what's being trying to be done. But then when it's normal everyday operations, just like Limmer did that interview with the National Registry guys, and they said their normal amount of feedback that they would get during their comment time was around 75 comments, and that's on 2 to 5 or 7 proposals, on any given board meeting year. And this year, at that time, they were up to 700. And then, Nick, didn't you have updated information on that?
Yeah, so they reported during the NAMC Symposium, which is the National Association of EMS Educators, this weekend. They reported there are over 1,000 comments just on this one proposal for this year. So very, very focused in, tuned in, nationwide comment. And they reiterated the same comments they made in the Limer interview, is that, if nothing else, EMS is going to change as a whole after this discussion. We will have seen some things, some changes will occur. And I think for EMS, we'll come out stronger one way or the other on the other side of all this.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking of accreditation as a sense of pride, right? Most organizations that have that, good housekeeping stamp of approval, they've got that thing on their tax returns that says that my organization has met accreditation standards. Police departments, SWAT teams even have accreditation and a set of standards. I'm thinking also to, you mentioned NAMC. So I'm going to just bring up on the screen for folks that haven't heard the keynote that was given by David Pfeiffer over the weekend, or was it Friday?
It was Friday morning. It very, very good keynote. He told us during the keynote that he was actually recording for the podcast. So he was very careful to make sure that whatever slides he put up, he was reading. But I highly recommend anybody go look at it, because it's a discussion on where should we go as a profession with our education to show that we are professionals.
Right.
Well,
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Robbie.
I listened to this at least twice. Once was today, and I was fascinated that he's talking about, his position used to be, we'll talk about a career path, right? That we need to set standards for degree requirements, and every paramedic should have a degree. And then he's kind of changed that outlook to say, like, look, there may be places where you don't need a paramedic to have a degree. It would be great to do that. But if our goal is to advance education across the board and create a retention program that's going to keep people in the industry, instead of having them skip out to go onto nursing or respiratory therapy, maybe onto medical school, if you look at other countries, right, they've developed multiple levels of paramedics based on their education and degree requirements. There's a comment here. Jenny's got a comment here that she's not even in EMS and she's watching this, but she's looking at going to the field as a medical assistant. And if you compare that to the world of nursing, right? Nursing had LPNs, right? That was a certificate level program. That wasn't a degree requirement. Nurses have associate degree programs. In New York State, they require a bachelor's degree program. Now we're seeing nurse practitioner over the last 10 or 15 years. So if we want there to be a career ladder, if we want to retain people, then what are we doing from an educational perspective to provide an option for folks? So I found this podcast fascinating.
I will jump in here and say a couple of things, kind of on a tangent. And maybe Weston would have some more input on this than me, but it almost seems to me like if you're thinking strategically and you want to get those elevated levels of education, that there needs to be some attention to the bean counters, right? Because the bean counters, as my father would call them, the money runs the world. And so it seems to me that there should be, okay, here's the thing. If you're actually measuring outcomes from your patients, so you run an ambulance service and you're looking at outcomes from your patients, and I don't have any clue how that's done or what you exactly look at. But if your reimbursement is based on better outcomes, then wouldn't that drive higher or better prepared, let's call them better prepared, which in my world means higher educated paramedics to be hired into that service? What are we doing from the educational standpoint? I'll just tell you in short, I don't think we're as kind of cut and raw honest with students on the first day as we should be. My first day speech was, if you just want to help people, go be a nurse. Because much like falling in love, the adrenaline of EMS fades over time. And so if you don't have something solid underneath that, a trust, a friendship, with the analogy of love still, if you don't have something solid left over, then when the hormones leave, you're miserable. And so there's got to be some passion for helping people in this particular way. And that was what I tried to do to add to retention, was not have people disillusioned, although it got very difficult because we eat our young. I mean, I don't think this is arguable anymore. I don't think this is anything anybody has to be shy about saying. In terms of accreditation and professionalism, it's almost like when we talk about, like Winston said, there's certain schools, you don't really still want graduates from. Well, okay, so we've got the nice gloss, we've got the nice title, but do you call your buddy out when they want to walk around the Quickie Mart with their pants hanging out of their boots, and won't tuck in their shirt? Do you take responsibility? Because that's free. That doesn't cost anything to actually live up to what we say we want. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I went a lot of places there.
No, I think those are all really valid points. And yeah, what
Weston,
go ahead.
In terms of reimbursement, I was very curious about that. Is there any outcome drivers yet?
For people being accredited?
For ambulance services?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
It's still just service-based.
Well,
Yeah,
I think Pfeiffer made a very good description of that, Robbie. If you remember talking about how CMS reimbursement occurs, and that's where in the EMS side, we don't have that reimbursement because there is a definition difference between a practitioner and a provider.
Yeah.
And practitioners can bill for services rendered. And then the definition of practitioner in the CMS rules is a graduate level degree with certain attainments in there, and that's where that difference comes. And like I said, in that Pfeiffer, he talked about that during that keynote speech.
And this is, again, getting back to ET, if we bring up the ET3 conversation, CMS and Medicare is looked at reimbursement models and done a test program of about 200 agencies throughout the country, enrolling them in treat and place options and actually reimbursing them for the cost of traditionally unreimbursed care. 30-40% of what we do is typically not reimbursed. Those patients we pick up at 2 o'clock in the morning, we don't, there's no compensation for that. So if we can look at a program like ET3, we really have to prove that, there's value in not bringing somebody to the most expensive point of care in a hospital system, which is the emergency department. That we can actually prove that we can treat people in place, give them alternative destination options. However, they included mid-level providers and above. So nurse practitioners, PAs have to be involved in that process, which comes into, paramedics, even degree carrying paramedics. We don't have that set of standards, that advanced practitioner standard like they do in other countries. I know we're talking a lot about the US, but I've had a chance to interview some of the most incredible people from Canada, from the UK, from Australia, where they have PhD carrying paramedics. They're talking about self-regulation and oversight and not even having medical directors because we are the experts in pre-hospital care. That's a whole different conversation than here we are in the States talking about this very fragmented, siloed system. And
I was just sitting here looking, wasn't there a recent proposal to do a PA paramedic or a nurse practitioner paramedic hybrid that started with the practitioner and tacked on the paramedic?
There's been a lot of conversations in the PA space I've heard over the years. I think especially from the military and folks, the PAs that were paramedics, and how do you create a PA program that is not just an in-hospital program?
You have to look at the education. I mean, when you look at bachelor's and master's level programs and even doctoral programs for EMS, what are they all geared towards currently? They're not geared towards provider. When you start going to that graduate level, they're geared towards research and administration. It's a master's in science in EMS administration or EMS research. And so one of the things that Mr. Pfeiffer brought up was that if we want this level of practitioner for paramedics, that we have to create master's and doctoral levels that are practitioner based. So looking more to the education, like what a nurse practitioner goes through or PA goes through, that's focused on care given, not, how to administer, an EMS agency, things like that. And so we've got to start there with that.
Yeah, and I think, like y'all had mentioned with the, I think that the base problem with the question is I think National Registry is, I guess, asking the wrong question. And so, like Julianne mentioned leadership, and we talked about this offline, and then one of the attendees mentioned it. I think we can all agree what the top, few problems in EMS is. One is recruitment of people, 2 is reimbursement, and then 3 is keeping people. And I can't think of anything that can't fall into those buckets. And so whenever National Registry has a question like that, is, like what we do in our leadership meetings is, we may, as a company, we've said recruitment and retention is really important to us. And so as we're looking at different programs, somebody in the room always asks, is this going to help us recruit or retain people? And the answer is no. Then it's like, okay, why are we even doing it? And so with National Registry, I think, if they're not going to ask the question, we need somebody else, doing this job, their job, and ask that question is, okay, as stakeholders, we've identified these problems in EMS. Is this going to address one of them? And the answer is no, then why are we asking it?
Well, and I did a SWOT analysis on my white paper, and if you're interested, you can navigate to it on the blog on Sterling Credentials. why you must support EMS now. And I did a SWOT analysis in that white paper, and one of the threats that I listed was telemedicine, because I could envision a time where it's too difficult to, get enough qualified, let's say, paramedics. And so I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's put a practitioner centrally located with the technology, and let's train some, what are we going to call them? IV starters. Yeah, let's train some IV starters, and they'll just do it when we tell them to, based on the telemedicine. And I would actually anticipate that to have even more of a retention diminishment, because what do we know about retention? Retention is based on satisfaction, right? And what satisfies people? Well, different things satisfy different people. For me, the reason that I stayed in EMS with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and actually jumped from NASA to EMS, was the autonomy. Like, for me, that was a personal, valuable thing. And so I would never be a candidate for a type of program that was, you're just the IV starter and we tell you, you just wait, we'll tell you what to do.
Well, I think something to remember about recruitment and retention, you brought up, Weston, talking about the National Registry. The National Registry's purpose when they came about in 72, I want to say it was for testing, for certification of personnel. And we have to understand the difference between certification and credentialing. Certification, where the National Registry is designed to test to make sure that you had the education at a minimum. I hear at conferences all the time and hear from other students all the time, well, the National Registry is such a difficult test. Honestly, the National Registry is a benchmark test. It should honestly, coming out of your program, be an easy test. It should be the hurdle you step over, not have to jump over to get to your credentialing in your state. If you're well preparing from the educational side, that student to be there. So, National Registry, as far as recruitment and retention in the workforce, that's not where their bailiwick lies. They are there to assess certification, and I think that's where a big part of this problem, and maybe we want to bring up the resolution, Robbie, is what we're talking about. Why are we here? What has been the big talk?
Good point, Nick.
So here is the resolution, folks, and
now let's qualify. This is a proposed
resolution draft, as you can see in big letters here.
Yes, and one of the reasons we're actually having this discussion is to try to give other folks a basis for forming their own opinion and jumping in on the public comment period, which is open until August 17th. Yes. And I'm sure Robbie will supply the link for that somewhere.
Yep, we've already got it in the chat, folks, and we've put it on the banner below as well. And if we zoom down here, I believe, into this area, there are a few ORs in here, right? So has been awarded a KHEP accreditation or has been issued a letter of review. And Nick, your institution was just issued that LOR. Correct. Letter of review. And I think the big contention here is this OR has received state EMS office approval, which essentially leaves it up to every state to now decide should an agency be able to use the National Registry for their paramedic program, leaving it up to, then you look at NASEMSO, right? National Association of State EMS Officials having input, and every state possibly having a different set of standards to make a decision on the graduation of paramedics.
So in the absence of data about what this would mean for actual patient outcomes, let me tell you what it means for people. You're 21 years old and you want to become a paramedic, and your local junior college, your local community college right there is go get your thing, and you go to work for a local service. And then something happens in your life 10 years later that requires relocation to another state. That state's reciprocity is extraordinarily unpredictable. Right. When there's no standard. And in fact, it could be very likely that, well, if you had come from an accredited university, well, all you have to do is pay your money and you get this new state, license. But since you didn't, I'm sorry, you have to go back to the beginning. There are actual people today in states which have continued to kind of leave it optional, National Registry optional, facing exactly that loss of investment.
And Julian, I was that 20-year-old, 19-year-old in the classroom that was just, I was kind of a bit dumbfounded. I looked around and there were folks in my class, in my program, that they had driven, they were 3-4 hours away from home and they had come to that program. Little did I know I was part of an accredited program that had a high level of standards. And people said, yeah, I could have gone locally. I could have done this program or that program, but I chose to, move up here to take this program. So again, the things that you just don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
When you're 20 years
And
old.
I think, so why would this necessarily mean a softening of standards? I mean, the statement, the whereas up above, one of them says that they want to recognize that there are other modes of validating education, and that's probably true. However, states are already underfunded. It's a challenge for them to even ensure that the ambulances carry the minimum equipment that's required by the state. In fact, Texas has farmed that out and allowed, and I don't know all the farm allowed, mandated, I don't know, but the cities are actually doing inspections on ambulances. And Nick, you're closer to this in Weston too than I am. I just know that there has been a struggle in Texas, at least, to ensure that ambulances that are actually providing patient care are operating at minimum standards. And in 20 years, I think I had one spot surprise inspection in my classroom. And that's not because they're not well-meaning. They are, but they just don't have the personnel or the funds to get it done. So you can't expect what you don't inspect. The huge advantage for all of its flaws and drawbacks and things that could be improved, COA inspects.
I think you hit the nail on the head as far as underfunded, the state's being underfunded. The same Department of State Health Services in the state of Texas, the same DSHS specialist that is in charge of inspecting ambulances and ensuring that they are, following the correct procedures and that they are equipped correctly, is the same specialist who's in charge of ensuring that my educational program is, performing validly. And while they're very well educated, very well knowledgeable, very well meaning, there's not enough of them to be able to service areas. So the person that's over my area is out of Abilene, which is a 2-hour drive from me. And he has a large territory that he covers, that he's not only responsible for the multiple education programs that are in there, but also the EMS agencies as well. And so in Weston, I don't know about over in the Texarkana area, but again, you have one dishes specialist for an entire region that's doing multiple things. They don't have the time to dedicate to looking at each program, as in depth as what, say, the accrediting body of KHEP has COA to come in and look. Are you following these standards?
I think.
I'm sorry, the next domino in that line of logic, because one of the things that we humans have trouble with is we're pretty short-sighted, reactive instead of proactive. And so I can tell you what comes next, which is there's a VP of instruction at your community college, and he's really getting the pressure put to him about the budget this year. We got to cut the budget, man. We got to cut the budget. And he says this line item for EMS program accreditation. And he somehow discovers, I don't know how that might be, that it's no longer mandated, that there is no longer, Texas legislation has changed, and so we can just get state approval. It's not about valuing education in the non-measurable sense. It's about, hey, that's an easy one to cut.
Yeah, it becomes an easy target.
Yeah, and the financial burden of it is not light. But again, unless we wanted it to be just like our state regulators, which is struggling to, even begin to put a dent in their responsibilities, that's the way it has to be. I wonder how the costs compare to other accreditations in a broad sense.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know the answer to that, but it just was a point of curiosity for me.
I can tell you all, for education wise, we're the KHEP COA fees that we're paying are around the same, if not just slightly less than some of the others, because it is a large fee for the LOR application fee. Currently, the COA fee is $4,050. I want to say is what that is, and that includes your application review, your site visit, and things like that. So I was like, man, this is an expensive endeavor. So I called down the street, because I mean, literally 2 blocks down the street is our 4-year university. And I called the respiratory therapy program, which is a KHEP accredited program. And I said, hey, what are your fees? And so they're telling me, and they're really around the same. I called the nursing program at the university, said, hey, what are your fees? Their fees are a little bit higher. I went to our nursing program. Their fees are a little bit higher. Across the hall from me is the surgical technology instructor. That is a KHEP accredited program as well. His fees are around the same as mine. So the fees on the education side are all fairly around the same for these different programs. But I just listed 2, that are still KHEP accredited, surgical technology, respiratory therapy, radiology is accredited. Nursing programs are accredited, Now, how that translates to CANES or CAMTS accreditation, I don't know what those costs on the provider side are. But as far as college-wise, education-wise, the fees are close to the same.
Maybe we could talk about the reasons why you wouldn't do this, right? So we've talked about costs, right? People will complain, well, it can be expensive. Shortages, personnel shortages, right? We're all facing, the Great Resignation, people finding other careers. This pandemic has changed. The last 2 years has felt like 20 years for paramedic providers who are on the front lines of this. But we see the nursing industry; they have a shortage. Does that mean they're going to give up nursing accreditation of programs? I highly doubt that. So I think we tend to look at the symptoms of the problem and try to treat them as opposed to going upstream. Where does this originate from? If you're sick of the exhaust your carbon engine emits, don't try to plug the exhaust and expect the carbon engine to keep running, right? You go upstream, you fix the engine, you create, an electric engine that doesn't have that problem. And I think all too often we, as it was said on this panel, right, we tend to be very reactive. And instead of talking about the problems, what if we talked about and had the conversation? What do we really want? What do we want for the future of paramedic education? What do we want for the future of paramedicine as an industry? What do we want for the future for our organizations and the providers that treat people in our communities? What do we want the experience to be? What if we created a industry that attracted people and didn't repel them, right? That didn't spit people out as if it was their pieces in a machine, but actually valued who they are in their organization and what they do. So
I think it's a great question for the two of y'all, Roby and Weston, because if you actually look at the national registry numbers of the number of paramedics that came out last year, we don't have a paramedic shortage. We have a paramedic and EMS allocation issue. Mm-hmm. Why don't we have them in the field anymore? Where are they gone? What can we do better on that advancement? That's one of the main reasons I left the company I was working for. I worked for AMR for 10 years. I had many opportunities. I was a Star of Life recipient. Went to Washington, D.C. I went on 3 or 4 different hurricane deployments. But when it came down to it, locally, there was no room for advancement. And I went into the operation manager's office and sat down in his office with my resignation letter in my pocket, in my suit pocket. And I said, can I ask you a question? When are you going to retire? Because I can't move up in this company as long as you're here. I said, and he'd been talking for the entire time I'd been there for 10 years, and he only had a couple years left. And I said, when are you going to retire? 3 years, 4 years, 5? If you can tell me, hey, in 5 years I'm going to retire, there's a part of my mind that I may stay here so I have that opportunity. When he goes, I don't know. I have no place to move up. So I said, here's my resignation. I will work part-time, but I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to a service. I've been running 15 calls a day for 10 years. I'm going to go to a service where I can slow down a little bit. So where do we go?
Wait, let me interrupt you, Nick. When Nick says slow down, he means teach full-time, go to school full-time, father full-time, and prep for accreditation, which he's been doing for the whole 3 years that I've known him.
Yeah, well, slow down is.
I mean, just so we can define what that downshift was exactly.
So Weston, on that provider side, what can we do to help retain our employees?
Yeah, I think it's there's multiple questions, and I think if you look at the this resolution by National Registry, I think it's answering the wrong question. As if we look at retention, there's a major, and we could go on about this for days, but there's a major leadership problem in EMS. Anybody that doesn't think that, it is the problem. And so we have to fix that, number one, to be able to keep people. And, when we look at bringing people in and the cost of it, yeah, it's expensive. And, the colleges have a bunch of money they have to spend on it. But, right now we're offering to pay to send people to schools. We're offering to send them to a traditional school, a fast track school, even a fire academy to get it done quicker. And in general, the people that want to become EMTs and paramedics, they don't know how much it costs because there's so many employers out there willing to pay for it. And so if it's not a cost issue, it could be free to the colleges and we'd still be in the same problem we are. So, I think what this question did by National Registry is it opened up another issue, which was, should one organization have the monopoly on accreditation? And the answer to that question is pretty easy, and it's no. I think that multiple options for accreditation, and should we require programs to be accredited? I would say probably a soft yes. I mean, it makes sense to me, but that's not why we can't get people to enter EMS and why we can't get people to stay in EMS. So I think people are using it to answer the wrong question.
Weston, do you guys pay for leadership training within your organization and succession planning or any like that? I mean, even to the degree of being the in charge on the truck, do you do any of that?
So we just started a succession planning program, and we do offer to pay for leadership training. The problem that we've had is all of our leadership team at the operations level ends up on the ambulance almost every day. And so to be able to develop those people has been quite a challenge.
Yeah. It's certainly a challenge we see all over. And we try to instill into leaders is to think, again, build that bench of leaders so that before they get promoted to that leadership position, they have the tools in their toolbox in order to deal with various situations that they're going to be faced with. Let's face it, just because you are a great paramedic does not mean that you're going to be the greatest leader, especially if we don't prepare them ahead of time, rather than just promoting them and then think afterwards, we should probably send them to some leadership training after the wake of damage that's probably already been done. I mean, we see this time and time again in organizations, and that's why we've really tried to, my whole passion the last 10 years has been, how do we create leadership education that's easily accessible, that can be done, it's not reserved for those that can fly to fancy national expensive conferences. Nothing against those, I've been to them. But how do we democratize this information to get it into the hands of the folks that can use it the most?
Well, and to be very fair and loving, I didn't realize that I had a leadership problem, right? I got very, very fortunate. I was sent to a leadership academy prior to my first shift as a supervisor. Wow. And the very first thing they did is we did an EQ test. Remember that we used to call it emotional quotient, now it's soft skills or whatever. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I got this, right? Because my patients love me. And, I've got a file full of letters of this thing in my prep book. No, I had one of the lowest scores in the class because I'm way too goal oriented. And it was a dawning for me of, oh, here's another skill set that I need to, number one, recognize is its own skill set. Number two, value. And then number three, pursue. And so, one of the things that we run into in the education side is our preceptor involvement, So, okay, preceptor, what's a preceptor? It's a shift mentor. All right. And in the accrediting process, we're required to do a capstone. And the capstone will be that final series of ambulance runs with a single preceptor who will, in fact, check the student off, among others, as entry level or not entry level. And finding the capstone preceptors, it was a little challenging, but they generally are pretty invested. Let's talk about just your everyday show up on the ambulance. Who am I riding with today? Crapshoot. There were a significant number of times that I really would have preferred to keep my students out of live shifts. And when we want to complain, and this is where I really start to get irritated, because people want to complain that there aren't enough bodies, or there's turnover, or there's, money is only valuable to people for about 28 days. In other words, if you give your whole staff a raise, for about 28 days, they're going to get some feel good off of it. And that's gone. And again, we're back to, what do you have left underneath? And if what's underneath is not fundamentally human, if it's some robotic machinations to you call, we haul, it will never get better. But the fact that on an individual level, we refuse to call out our colleagues who, I was a brand new medic. I mean, 10 minutes I'd been a medic maybe. And I marched up to one of the most senior paramedics in the service. He was off going. And I said, hey, can I talk to you a minute? He was like, yeah. I said, could you do us a favor? He was like, sure, what can I do to help you? And I said, I know that I don't leave that sticky stuff under the urinal, so could you please clean it before we come on shift? It didn't make me very popular, no. And I learned to soften my words over the years. But if we're not holding each other accountable at the grassroots level, then I say we got no business asking for, any kind of sort of national advocacy.
Wow, spot on. You mentioned essential skills, or as soft skills, these emotional intelligence skills, and I think we need to rephrase them as essential skills. There's only so much. You're all leaders in paramedic education. There's only so much you can pack into a curriculum for paramedics, which is the reasoning behind a degree pathway. If people can see understand a 360 emotional intelligence survey where they're actually able to gather, their and rate their level of self-awareness, their level of emotional self-control. Those are critical aspects to not only dealing with incivility in the workplace, and also dealing with the patients that they're gonna face on a daily basis. So spot on. If we can give more people those terminology for it, language for it, on their communication, how they come across, how they present themselves. I mean, these are just essential skills for any provider if we want to keep people in the game, and we want to create organizations that, aren't full of toxic leaders or toxic people. And frankly, leadership we believe can happen at any level. You don't have to be in a position of leadership in order to lead. Certainly it's easier if you have buy-in from the higher ups, but anybody can certainly be a leader in their organization. So
I think it's one of the most important things that, as an educator, that we look at and evaluate is that students' affective domain, which is how they interact with, and it starts in the classroom with me, how they interact with me, how they interact with their peers, how they interact with their peers in the lab setting when we put them in a stressful situation, how do they interact with other instructors, and then the preceptors grade them on their affective domain. How are they interacting with the patient? I often reference it. I can't go get out on the truck with them and be a fourth rider on an ambulance, and because the EMS providers don't really want that fourth person riding around, because then we look like a clown car rolling up and we got 4 people rolling out of the back of an ambulance. So I rely heavily on that preceptor to grade them. And I get on to my preceptors, and anybody that's watching this that is still a medic working in the field, you do a disservice to that student and the education program if you don't evaluate that student correctly. If they are not performing well, and you give them all above average grades on their evaluation, and then you come to me when I come to the clinical site for a visit, and you go, man, that student is horrible. Doesn't say so in your evaluation. Your evaluation says they're above average. If you had a problem, you should have told me that you have a problem, because then I can address it. And so we have to, as a profession, hold our students that are coming in, these people that are coming into our profession, to that same standard that we hold ourselves. The man who mentored me that ran this program when I went through it, that passed away the year that I graduated my paramedic school, he said, you know, I only have 2 hands and 2 arms to take care of the person that's in front of me. But I have all these little fingers that go out into the community, and that's what you as my students are. And that's the way I look at my students. You know, when a student graduates from my program, I want that student to be a person that when they roll up to my house to take care of me or my family, that I'm like, hey, I am okay with you being here. Great. I don't want to be an educator that sees that student roll up and I go, oh, God. I'm just going to throw him in the car and take him to the hospital myself. And so if we as paramedics on this truck aren't holding our future coming in to those high standards, then we're doing a disservice to our profession that we have. Let's face it, there's only so many years in our life that we can pick up 500-pound patients, and there's going to come a point where we can't pick them up anymore, and we have to have these young kids that are coming into this profession, and we have to give them that education and that knowledge, and we can't treat them and eat them like they're nothing. We have to have. Just because it was done to you doesn't mean it needs to be done to the new person.
It's so antithetical to what a paramedic is. Right? We go into the back of a unit and we take care of strangers because we give a crap. And so, as far as I'm concerned, the practitioners out there, we all have bad days and we all have days we don't want to have students, and that's understandable. We're human. But the ones that are ugly to the students on purpose, I don't think they should be in our profession. I don't. And I know that there's not anything I can do about it, and that all apples have bad buckets and all the cliches. But for me, this was such a calling, and it's noble is not the right word. It's just so in my blood that to have it disrespected in that way, because you can't be both people. You can't be the hero who actually cares about their patients and the guy kicking the students in the face. That to me cannot coexist.
So, Raleigh, my question to you is going to be: have we answered your question on accreditation?
Well,
do you
folks,
have a
we are
better
nearing
way in accreditation? If not, then let's clear it up.
We are nearing the end of this hour. I want to thank everyone for joining in. We've had people watching for the last hour, commenting. We appreciate you out there and who you are for your community. So maybe we could just go around with some final thoughts on this. We want to encourage folks to let your voice be heard, right? If you're wondering, why should I care? Why should you care? I mean, Nick pointed to it. Give it 20, 40 years, right? You're going to be in a position where you're going to be calling those paramedics. Let's make sure that they have high standards. Let's make sure they're being taken care of and they're in an environment where they can thrive and they're not just surviving that job. So maybe we could just take it around the table here. Some final parting words for folks that are watching. Again, that public comment period is open through August 17th. And I say we start with Julianne.
Well, I was very encouraged to hear the National Registry folks saying that, they were going to carefully and transparently evaluate the comments, and that's good. It is public comment. This does not have to be restricted, nor should it be, to EMS. There have been a number of things that I've seen throughout my career that I thought if anybody in the real, i.e. not EMS world, saw this, they would not approve. And so that was why I kind of stepped out to try to see what kind of non-EMS involvement we could get in calibrate us. We're not always right all the time. And so the value of those various inputs is good. Get there and get your voice heard, get it heard. I will also say that I too, like the National Registry chair, so, am encouraged that it has generated so much discussion.
Yeah.
And it may just be the 3% pockets that I'm seeing, but there has been a lot of discussion about this question that to me is just an absolutely unthinkable question to ask. Like, how is this even a question when it's been, for the last several years, the big talk and push has been degree.
Right.
In short, yes, I think we need accreditation. And I think that suggesting competition for it is the same as saying, or the state can approve it. It's a competition to see who can be easiest, to see who can get in. Is accreditation that we have perfect? Absolutely not, nor will it ever be. And so the best I can do is try to contribute to, fine tuning.
Beautifully said. And Nick, do you want to leave us with some final comments and thoughts as somebody, especially that has just gone through the grueling process of accreditation?
Yeah, like you, is anything perfect? No. And one of the things that I took out of the NAVSE symposium this weekend from both the COA and National Registry is that they're both willing and looking for comment on how to improve. The National Registry made it very evident that they're looking at this and don't think just like when you see a grass fire, don't think somebody else called 911 to report it. Make sure you make that phone call. Same thing here. Don't think somebody else gave your perspective to the National Registry on what you think this proposal is. Make your comment. Get on there and make a comment. Be a vested stakeholder in what is going on. As far as accreditation, like I said, COA sought me out at the symposium. The assistant director and the director, both Dr. Hatch and Dr. Miller, and then Jennifer Warwick, sought me out and pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, you just went through this process. What could we do to make this easier? What could we do to make this better? What was bulky?" And I gave them my list. I had a list because I'm like, this is wrong. This is wrong. Change this. Make this better. And so they took those. She made notes. She's like, okay, and I think Weston is right. I think we need to have accreditation. Maybe having a second accrediting body is feasible. But I think what Robbie said during our pre-talk was we need something at a higher level. Was Ronald Reagan said, nothing's more scary than saying, "Hi, I'm here from the federal government. I'm here to help." Do we need the federal government involved? No, but do we need a set of standards, though, that the accrediting bodies are going to have to meet as what we feel as a profession should be there? Because like Julianne said, we don't want it to go to, well, I'm an accrediting body. Oh, okay, you got money, you got a facility. Hey, here you go. You can go teach paramedic classes. Not everybody can teach medic classes.
Absolutely. Well said. And Weston?
So to answer the original question, I think accreditation is a good thing. In its current form, does it need to stay in that form? I'm not convinced of that. I do think competition would be good. I also think that a lead federal agency to not necessarily regulate, but to govern, well, maybe not to even govern, but to set some standards.
Sure.
Would be a good thing. And I don't think either of those things is going to fix our recruitment issue. It definitely isn't going to fix retention. EMS leaders are going to have to fix the leadership problem to address those two things. And until we do that, and you separate them, because recruitment isn't the same as retention. Retention, the only thing that'll solve that is leadership, nothing else. Recruitment, there's a lot of other things that can be done, but the primary thing is leadership. So there you go.
Couldn't have said it better myself, and we got a little scrolling quote there now for good.
Did you see that, Weston?
Yeah, thanks.
Stop recruiting people into a poor performing organization, right? They're dealing with this constant revolving door syndrome, and people just want to recruit people in as quickly as they leave, and it just seems to be insanity. So go upstream, folks. Fix the problem where it originated from. Focus on the culture of an organization that's worthy of a highly engaged team. And certainly, I'll get off that soapbox, but I appreciate your time. This panel has been incredible. Thank you all for your time. This panel from Texas, which is great.
Well, we are the great state of Texas. So
great state of Texas.
Maybe we'll be our own country soon.
But we've had folks joining from around the world, South Africa, and folks looking at the U.S. right now to see what's going to happen. And I guess we'll all find out when this public comment period closes in August 17th. So folks, definitely look for the information, EMS Leadership Academy.com/. Ed Roundtable, and there's a link that will go directly to the public comment area, or just Google it. So, Julianne, thanks again for your passion for accreditation and your insights today. Nick, thanks for joining in and talking about, just your experiences of going through that accreditation, and Weston, for your experience as a leader in an organization that is certainly facing the pressures that a lot of other organizations are dealing with. So, folks, I will go ahead and end the broadcast, and thanks again for joining us.